Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was a cruel thing that day, high and white and burning over the Sonoran Desert like it had something to prove. Edda Whitlow staggered, one boot dragging behind the other, her skin blistered and raw. Her wide-brimmed hat had blown off miles back, and her lips had split from the dry air. She did not remember how many hours she had been walking. Maybe it had been a full day. Her mind moved slow, like molasses in winter. Her canteen was long dry. The wind howled low across the sand, and she felt it in her bones. This land did not care if she lived or died. Her knees buckled. She dropped hard into the dust, arms giving out beneath her. The desert took her like it meant to keep her. Her cheek pressed into the grit, and the last thing she saw before her eyes closed was the shimmer of heat rising in the distance. Then hoofbeats. They came like thunder across the silence. She did not have the strength to lift her head. All she could do was lie there, half-conscious, while the sound got closer. A voice broke through the haze. "Hey, hey, ma'am, can you hear me?" Rough hands touched her shoulders, turning her gently. "Damn it," the voice muttered. "You out here alone?" Then darkness. Edda woke slowly, her lashes crusted with dust, her mouth dry as cotton. The sun was lower now. She was under the shade of a canvas tarp, the light filtered and soft, a canteen pressed to her lips. "Easy now," the man said. Small sips. She drank, and it hurt going down. Still, she drank again. Her eyes focused. The man kneeling beside her had a worn face, lined from sun and wind, with dark brown hair that curled at the ends. His eyes were sharp and steady, the color of river stones. He wore a trail coat, the collar dust-caked, and a rifle rested near his saddle. "Where?" she rasped. "South of Gila Bend," he said. "You were about 10 miles off any trail. I thought you were dead." She tried to sit up, but the world spun. "Lie still," he said, easing her back down. His hand was warm on her shoulder. "You need rest. What the hell were you doing out here alone?" She blinked hard. "Stagecoach. Broken axle 2 days ago. Driver said help was coming. It never did. I walked. I thought I could make it. Jesus. Others stayed with the coach. I could not." He watched her quietly. "Name's Orin West. I was headed north, saw buzzards and figured something was wrong." She nodded faintly. "Edda Whitlow. You got family nearby, Edda?" Her throat worked. "Not anymore." He waited, but she said nothing else. She stared at the side of his horse, tethered nearby, and let the silence stretch. After a long moment, Orin stirred. "I have jerky, hard bread, and coffee. You think you can eat?" She nodded. That night, she sat wrapped in a blanket near his fire. Her hands trembled as she held the tin cup of coffee. Orin sat across from her, arms resting on his knees, his gaze never straying too long. He was not the kind of man who filled the quiet with talk. Edda liked that more than she expected. She sipped slowly. "You ever lose someone?" He glanced up, then nodded. "Wife." Fever took her. Years back. Something old and raw twisted in her chest. "My husband died last winter. Fell from a ladder. We were in Kansas then." She swallowed. "I buried him with my own hands. We had a small homestead. I could not keep it. Debt came fast. His brothers took what was left. I had to leave. I thought Arizona might have work." Orin's jaw tightened. "You have children?" Her eyes dropped. "No. We tried." She shook her head. "No." He looked at her for a long while. Then he said, "You should not be out here alone. I can take you as far as Tucson. I know folks there. You could rest, find work." The fire cracked between them. She stared into the flames, then looked up. "Why are you helping me?" He tilted his head a little, like the question confused him. "Because you needed help." She nodded. "Thank you." They rode at first light. Orin had given her his spare horse, a sturdy dun mare. Edda sat stiff in the saddle, her body still weak, but she did not complain. They traveled slow, the sun rising hot over the desert. Dusk kicked up behind them, and the silence stretched easy. He kept close, always just a little ahead, eyes scanning the horizon. She watched the way he moved, calm, sure. A man who had been alone a long time. That night, as they made camp near a dry arroyo, he handed her a blanket, then paused. "I will be just over there," he said, nodding toward a patch of mesquite. "If you need anything." She took the blanket. "You do not have to sleep away from the fire." His eyes met hers. "I do not want to make you uncomfortable." "You do not." He hesitated. Then he sat beside the fire again. They ate in quiet. She watched him, the way his hands moved, the way he kept glancing toward her, like he was not sure if he should speak. She broke the silence. "You do not talk much." He shrugged. "Talking never fixed much." She smiled, the first real one in days. "No. But sometimes it helps." He looked over at her, and something passed between them, soft, uncertain. "You think you will stay in Arizona?" he asked. "I do not know. Maybe." "You could," he said, his voice low. "There is room out here. For someone starting over." She looked at him. For the first time in a long time, her chest ached with something other than grief. Maybe it was the desert. Maybe it was the quiet strength in his voice. But sitting beside Orin West, watching the fire burn low, Edda felt something she had not known in a long time. Hope. And she did not want to turn away from it. The third morning on the trail broke cold, wind carrying a bite that clung to the skin. Edda rose stiff-limbed, the soreness in her legs a dull echo of the miles behind them. Orin had a small fire going already, crouched beside it, feeding it cedar twigs with the quiet focus of someone long used to the rhythm of survival. She stepped closer, holding her shawl tight across her shoulders. "You sleep any?" he asked without looking up. "Some," she said. "Dreams were loud, though." He nodded like he understood, though he didn't ask what the dreams were about. Instead, he poured a dipper of water into a battered tin pot and set it near the flames. "Coffee's coming," he said. "Mule wandered off in the night, so I'll need a bit to track her down." Edda crouched across from him, her fingers near the fire. "I can help." "You're still healing," he said gently. "I can follow tracks." His eyes flicked up, studying her in that quiet way of his. "You done some tracking before?" "Not much. But I can learn." He nodded once. "All right." They didn't speak again until they found the mule standing in a patch of wild grass near a dry creek, chewing lazily. Edda reached for the rope with slow movements, not wanting to spook it. "She always wander off like this?" she asked. "Only when I forget to hobble her," Orin said. "Which I did." She glanced at him. "You're not as careful as you look." He gave a short breath of a laugh. "No, I'm not." They walked back with the mule plodding along behind them, the morning warming as the sun crept higher. A line of mountains rose to the east, their blue shadows sharp against the sky. Saguaro stood like sentries across the ridges. "What do you want out of Arizona?" Orin said after a while. Edda took a moment before answering. "To be somewhere I don't have to explain myself." He gave a small nod, thoughtful. "You think that place exists?" "I don't know. But the desert's quiet. That helps." They rode through the afternoon with little talk, the land stretching in all directions. A hawk circled high above, casting a flicker of shadow across the sand. The world out here felt stripped down to bone and breath. Edda felt like she was slowly learning to breathe again. At dusk, they found the remains of an old trading post, just a stone foundation and a rusted wagon wheel half buried in the dirt. Orin tethered the horses near a patch of mesquite and started gathering dry branches. Edda knelt beside the crumbled stones, her fingers grazing the weathered wood of a broken beam. "Someone built here once," she said. "Long time ago," he replied. "Before the railroad cut through. Folks moved on. Hard to imagine packing up and leaving everything behind." Orin straightened, an armful of branches in his arms. "Harder staying put when there's nothing left." They made camp inside the low foundation, the firelight flickering against the stone. Edda sat with her knees drawn close, a piece of dried apple in her hand. Orin sat nearby, rolling a cigarette between his fingers but not lighting it. "Back before she passed," he said, voice low, "my wife liked to keep a garden, even out in that dry patch we had. She grew beans, squash, one stubborn tomato vine. She said it made the place feel like hers." Edda looked over, surprised. "You never mentioned her name." "Clara. She sounds steady." She was. He rubbed at a spot on his wrist, then let the hand drop. "Do you ever wish you'd stayed?" she asked. He met her gaze. "Sometimes. But I think I'd have turned bitter." Nothing left to hold on to. The fire popped between them. Edda leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I used to bake when things got bad, she said. Bread mostly. Something about kneading dough made the world feel manageable. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to make it again. Orin didn't offer comfort. He just listened, his eyes steady and open. She drew a breath. But I think if I had a kitchen again, I might try. There was a long pause. Then he said, there's a place outside of Tubac. Old ranch house, been empty since spring. Good well. I was thinking of putting in a claim. She looked at him carefully. You want to settle? Maybe. If I had reason to. The air changed between them, then not sharp, not sudden. Just a shift, the way a breeze turns warm in the evening. Edda stood and stepped away from the fire, her eyes drawn to the wide line of stars rising over the eastern sky. Orin came to stand beside her, close but not touching. There's still a long way to Tucson, she said. There is, he agreed. The stars stretched overhead, clear as glass. But I'm not in a hurry, she said quietly. He looked at her then, and the way he did it slow, certain made something in her chest settle that hadn't since Kansas. I'm not either, he said. The wind shifted 3 days south of Casablanca, carrying the smell of mesquite smoke and the faintest trace of river water. Orin reined in just shy of a ridge and pointed to the cottonwoods clustered below. Salt River's down there, he said. We'll camp near the bank. Good grass for the animals and the water's clear. Edda nodded, wiping grit from her cheek with the back of her hand. Her hands didn't tremble anymore when she reached for the reins. They descended slowly, the slope loose with stone. Orin rode ahead, his weight balanced easy in the saddle, and Edda followed at a careful pace, her eyes sweeping the brush for movement. The mare trusted her now. When they reached the flats, she dismounted without help. He walked with her to the river's edge. The water moved clean over stone, shallow but steady. Been a long time since I could wash without cupping from a canteen, she said. Go ahead, Orin offered. I'll see to the horses. She knelt at the edge and let the cold water run over her fingers. It soaked through the sleeves of her dress, and she welcomed it. The wet cloth clung to her skin, and she didn't care. She dunked her forearms up to the elbow, then splashed her face, gasping as the chill reached her scalp. When she looked up, Orin was gathering branches along the bank, his rifle slung across his back. That evening, the fire was low and steady, and the smell of coals mixed with the scent of damp earth and horsehair. Edda sat cross-legged, brushing knots from her hair with her fingers. You ever think about what you'd be if life had gone differently? She asked. Orin scraped the last of the beans from his tin. What do you mean? If you hadn't married Clara. If I hadn't married Eli. If we'd been born somewhere else to someone else. He stared into the fire for a long moment. I might have stayed in Missouri. My father ran a smithy. I was learning the trade before the war called him off. Then it called me. You were a soldier? He nodded once. Union cavalry. Saw too much, left before I forgot how to sleep. She studied him. And the smithy? Gone when I got back. Fire took it. Father didn't return either. Edda drew her shawl tighter. I used to think I'd teach. I was always good with numbers and I liked quiet rooms. You'd be made a fine teacher. She gave a short laugh. Eli's people said I was too sharp-tongued. Said I'd scare children. Then they didn't know children. They fell into silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that filled slowly like rising water in a dry gulch. Edda reached toward the fire and turned the last piece of bread over the coals. I never learned to shoot, she said. He told me I didn't need to. Orin didn't look up. You want to? I think I should. After a moment, he stood and crossed to his saddlebag. He drew out a small revolver and checked the chamber. This one's light, he said. Kick won't knock you down. She took it with both hands. Felt heavier than she expected. Orin stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her shoulder. Grip it like this, he said, adjusting her fingers. Thumb here, wrist firm. She followed the motion, her spine straightening. He pointed toward a dark line of rock near the treeline. Try for that flat stone. Her hands tightened. She fired. The shot cracked through the night, sending birds flapping into the air. The rock was untouched. She handed the gun back, half smiling. I missed. You didn't flinch. She looked over her shoulder. That worth something? He met her eyes. More than most things. The next morning, dew clung to the grass and the horses' hides steamed as the sun rose. Orin saddled the horses while Edda rolled their blankets. He tied down the provisions, then paused. There's a trading stop east of here, he said. Lived in but quiet. The woman who runs it's part O'Autumn. Speaks English, Spanish, and enough Apache to keep peace. I stopped there when I passed through. Edda adjusted her cinch strap. She's someone you trust? She's never cheated me and she keeps her coffee hot. They rode east through country thick with cholla and ocotillo. The land shifted with every mile, sparser trees, more open sky. Around midday they saw the smoke from the cook fire spiraling up. The trading stop was a wide porch strung with wind-worn blankets and bells. A goat wandered near the edge of the fence. A woman stepped from the doorway, a tall figure in a woven skirt and a faded blouse, her black hair braided down her back. Orin West, she called. You bring trouble with you today? Not unless you count a woman with strong opinions, he said. The woman's eyes went to Edda. You his wife? Edda hesitated. No. I'm traveling with him. The woman nodded once. Then you come in and I'll see if either of you is smart enough to trade fair. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dried corn and old tobacco. Edda wandered while Orin bartered. She ran her hand along a woven blanket, the pattern deep red and indigo, the edges worn soft with age. The woman returned with a kettle. You're not from here. No, Edda said. You looking to be? I don't know yet. The woman poured 2 cups and handed one to her. I was a widow once. Still am, I suppose. But the word don't mean the same after a while. Edda looked at her. What does it mean now? The woman sipped her drink. Means you lived through something. And you get to decide what comes next. They left with coffee, cornmeal, and a length of canvas. The sky was a deep, endless blue and the sun had softened behind a line of clouds. As they rode, Orin glanced over. She likes you. She doesn't know me. She sees people clear. Doesn't waste time on ones she can't read. Edda looked straight ahead. What do you think she saw? He was quiet for a stretch, then said, Same thing I do. There was no need to ask what that was. The silence between them held it plainly. That night, they made camp beside a low rise where the grass grew long and golden. Edda sat with her knees drawn to her chest, watching the horses graze. Orin knelt beside the fire, sharpening his knife. Without turning, she said, What would it take to stay? He didn't answer at first. Then, slow and sure, he said, You. She turned to him. I don't have a house yet, he said, but I know where to put one. I don't have much, but I'd share every piece of it. The wind moved through the grass, whispering low. I don't want to be someone you carry out of pity, she said. I never pitied you. He stood and walked to her, his boots quiet in the dirt. He knelt, resting his hands on his thighs. I want to build something with someone who's proven they won't turn from hard ground. You're the only person I've met who looks at this land like it might have something left to give. She reached out, fingers brushing his. His hand closed around hers. I want to stay, she whispered. Then they just sat like that, the firelight flickering, the night stretching wide and still around them. The desert didn't give blessings easily, but now and then it offered a beginning. The ranch house sat at the edge of a draw, its walls pale with sun and well-worn, the roof patched in places with tin flattened from old biscuit tins. A line of cottonwoods shaded the back, their roots drinking from a narrow spring that ran quiet through the brush. The place had stood empty since spring, but the bones of it were still strong. Orin pushed the door open with the edge of his boot. The hinges gave a low groan. Dust curled in the light that slanted through the warped window glass. A table stood under the far window, one leg splinted with rawhide. A stove squatted in the corner, its belly rusted but solid. Edda stepped inside behind him, her eyes moving slow over the room. She ran her fingers lightly across the edge of the table, then looked back at him. How long will it take to get it livable? Few weeks if we work steady. The roof needs sealing before the rains come. I can handle the inside, she said. You take the roof. They spent the next 2 days clearing nests from the eaves and hauling out broken planks. Orin stripped the cracked shingles and tacked new boards scavenged from a line shack up north. Edda scrubbed the walls with lye water and set traps for the mice that had made homes in the corners. They worked without much talk, the kind of silence that grew from shared purpose, not distance. On the third morning, Edda found a bundle of dried sage tucked above the lintel. She held it up when Orin came down from the ladder. Someone left this for protection, she said. He took it from her hand, turned it over once, and nodded. Leave it. Might still be watching. That night, they ate by lantern light at the table she'd wiped clean with vinegar and salt. Orin had roasted a jackrabbit caught in a snare, and Edda had boiled wild onions she'd found near the spring. She poured tea into 2 tin cups and sat down across from him. You ever think this place might be too quiet? She asked. He lifted his cup. Sometimes, but the quiet here feels earned. She traced the rim of her cup. There's a difference between quiet and silence. I've known both. He watched her, waiting. Back in Kansas, she said Eli used to go days without saying anything if the crops failed. Not angry, just gone. I learned to fill the air myself. Talk to the chickens, the stove, the rain. You don't have to do that here. I know. That's what I'm trying to get used to. Later, she stood at the doorway looking out across the darkened field. The stars were high and sharp above the cottonwoods. Orin joined her, his shoulder brushing hers. You think you'll want chickens again? He asked. Maybe, but I'd rather have goats. They're harder to offend. He gave a quiet laugh, and she looked up at him. I never saw myself ending up in Arizona, she said. I never saw you coming either, he said. But I'm not wishing it different. She didn't answer, just reached for his hand. He let her take it. The next morning, Orin saddled the dun mare and rode out to the nearest town 3 hours east for nails, flour, and a new axe handle. Edda stayed behind, tending the spring and sweeping the dirt floor with a broom made from tied mesquite twigs. She found a set of curtains folded in an old trunk and washed them in the cold stream water, hanging them to dry on the fence line. By dusk, Orin returned, dust clinging to every crease in his coat. He handed her a small paper bundle before he even dismounted. What's this? She asked. Something you'll want. Inside was a small packet of seeds, beans, golden summer squash, and a scattering of tomato. She ran her thumb over the label. You remembered. I remember most things you say, he said simply. She turned from him, not because she didn't want to be seen, but because her eyes had gone wet without warning. That night, she planted the first handful of bean seeds in a row near the spring, her knees dark with soil, the air still with the hush of twilight. Orin watched from the porch, his arms folded across his chest. He didn't speak, but the way he looked at her said more than any words had. By the end of the week, the roof no longer leaked, the stove drew smoke proper, and Edda had lined the shelf above the hearth with jars scrubbed clean and waiting to be filled. The place smelled of sage and coffee and a little smoke, and the floor was warm beneath her bare feet. She stood in the doorway as Orin returned from chopping wood, his shirt damp with sweat, the axe heavy in his grip. He set it down by the chopping block and came toward her. You tired? She asked. A little. Come inside. He stepped past her and she closed the door behind him. Later, as they lay side by side beneath the patched quilt they'd found in the old trunk, Edda reached across the space between them and touched the curve of his jaw. I want to make this a home, she said. He caught her hand in his. You already have. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods like a lullaby. Inside, the stillness was full, not silent, not empty. Just full. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. By late spring, the garden had taken root. Edda knelt in the soft earth near the spring, coaxing the first real shoots of squash from the soil. Her fingernails were dark with dirt, and her sleeves were rolled past the elbow. The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the dew, and her breath still showed faint in the air. Behind her, the ranch house stood quiet, smoke curling from the chimney in a steady line. It was hers now, not in deed, not in paper, but in every way that mattered. She heard Orin's steps before she turned. His boots made little sound these days when he crossed the grass. He crouched beside her and set down a wooden crate filled with eggs and a small sack of salt. Traded for those with the couple out past the ridge, he said. They've got a henhouse near bursting. Edda brushed a curl from her forehead. You go all the way to the Seaver's place? They asked after you. Said if you wanted chickens, they'd set aside a pair of pullets come July. She leaned back on her heels. I'd like that. Maybe we could build a coop behind the shed. We could. His hand found hers, fingers rough but warm. She looked down at their joined hands and let herself lean into the quiet between them. That afternoon they repaired the fence along the south line. Orin drove the posts and Edda handled the wire, looping and twisting it with a rhythm she'd learned through doing. Sweat rolled down her neck and the sun pressed hard against her back, but she didn't stop until the last post stood firm. As they walked back toward the house, Orin looked toward the hills rising east, their edges worn smooth with distance. You ever think about going back? He asked. To Kansas? To anywhere else? No, she said. There's no part of me that wonders. She glanced at him. Do you? He shook his head. I've been places. Never stayed long. I think I was always waiting for something to make me stop. He didn't say more, but he didn't need to. She'd come to understand that about him, that the words he didn't say often carried more weight than the ones he did. That evening, they sat on the porch with their boots off and their feet stretched toward the last of the sun. The air smelled faintly of juniper and wood smoke. A pair of mourning doves called from the cottonwoods, soft and low. Edda sipped from her tin cup and watched the line where the light met the hills. I keep thinking about how this started, she said. You were half dead in the desert, he said. Not the best beginning. But it was honest, she said. And I think that's worth something. He looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them, something that had been building since the first night she'd sat across from him at a fire, too tired to speak but not yet willing to give up. I don't want a wedding dress, she said. Or a preacher. I just want to stand in this dirt and know I'm not alone. You won't be, he said. Not ever again. She reached for his hand and he gave it, steady and sure. They didn't speak of promises. They didn't need to. Weeks passed and the house filled with small things, a chipped teapot from the Seavers, a carved wooden spoon Orin had whittled in the evenings, a scrap of lace Edda had sewn into a curtain for the bedroom window. The garden grew full and heavy and Edda baked bread for the first time in 2 years. She didn't cry when she pulled it from the stove. She just stood with her hands on the counter and breathed in the warm, yeasty scent like it was a kind of prayer. One morning, Orin came in from the barn with a quiet look on his face. There's a letter came through town, he said, handing her the envelope. It was smudged and creased, addressed in a hand she hadn't seen since Kansas. She opened it with careful fingers. It was from her sister-in-law, Anna. A short letter, plain and apologetic. She'd heard Edda had left. She hadn't known what had happened to her. She was sorry for what little she'd done, and for what she hadn't. Said if Edda ever wanted to write, she'd be glad to hear from her. Edda read it twice, then folded it up and tucked it into the drawer beside the stove. You going to write her back? Orin asked. I think I will, she said. But not today. He nodded. When you're ready. Summer came like a slow tide. They built the chicken coop together, Edda hammering side by side with him, both of them sunburned and laughing when one of the hens turned out to be a rooster with a voice like a steam kettle. They slept with the windows open and woke to the sound of wind through the trees. On Sundays, they walked the ridge and sat with their backs against the warm stone, watching the land stretch wide in all directions. One evening, with the sky burning orange and the scent of rain on the wind, Orin took her hand as they stood beneath the cottonwoods. We made something here, he said. She nodded. And it's good. He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with the deep, steady certainty of a man who had found where he belonged. And she kissed him back with everything she had left, everything she'd gathered and grown since the day he found her in the dust. Years later, folks passing through the territory would speak of the ranch with the garden that never failed and the porch always swept clean. They'd say the couple who lived there kept their gate open, their coffee hot, and their word even hotter. but none of them would ever know what it cost to build it or how deeply it was rooted. Edda and Orin never left that land. They grew old in its warmth, side by side, hands weathered and hearts steady. And when the days grew quiet again as they do, they faced them together, never alone.